Next bill under consideration is House Bill 1163. Madam Secretary.
Engrossed House Bill 1163, now with Senate amendments. A bill for an act to repeal sections 12.1-30-01, 12.1-30-02, and 12.1-30-03 of the North Dakota Century Code relating to Sunday closing laws. The fiscal note shows no impact.
Senator Dotson-Rod.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the Senate. This bill, House Bill 1163, is the Sunday closing law bill that we've heard something about. It was heard in the Senate Political Subdivisions Committee. Yesterday when we had the bill here, we amended the bill so that we are now just repealing sections 1, 2, and 3. And since your computers don't really show you what those words say, and this is all quite brief, this section 1 of 12.130 says business or labor on Sunday exemptions, classification of offenses, and it just says that you can't, unless it's otherwise provided in sections 2 and 3, you cannot operate a retail business between the hours of 12 midnight and 12 noon to do any of the following activities: engage or conduct business or labor for profit in the usual manner and location. B, operate a place of business open to the public. And C, authorize or direct that person's employees or agents to take action prohibited under this section. So that first section that we're repealing sets up that 12-hour period from midnight till 12 noon when certain businesses are required by state law to be closed. The next section that's repealed, section 2, is titled Items Prohibited from Sale or Rental on Sunday. This is a list of 44 items, and they're all listed there 1 through 44 of things that are prohibited from sale under the terms of the section 1, that is at that 12-hour period that was established in the first section. And the list includes footwear, headgear, home appliances, cameras, dryers, musical instruments, lamps, and so on. So section 2 that's repealing is the list of things that you cannot sell on Sunday unless you're in that 12-hour period. And then section 3 that's being repealed is businesses allowed to operate on Sunday, limitations. And that's a list of 39 exceptions to that 12-hour limitation that we had in section 1. And there's things in there like restaurants, hotels, motels, hospitals, cold storage warehouse, motion pictures, parks, amusement centers. It's a list that goes on, and the last one is bingo halls. So this is the list of businesses that we allow to operate on Sunday. So those are the 3 that we would be repealing if we adopted this bill. We did leave, by virtue of the amendment that we adopted yesterday, section 4 in law, which would be the only thing remaining in this chapter then, would be that you cannot require a leaseholder as part of the lease agreement to require them to have to be open on Sunday. So those are the words that are in the Century Code that we would be repealing if we adopted this law. And as many of you are aware, we've had a long history with Sunday closing in North Dakota. We had, at the time of even before we were a state, there were laws that were required that were called Sabbath breaking laws, and these were revised and adopted into our North Dakota Revised Code in 1895, and they said you could not do one of the 5 or any one of the 5: servile labor, public sports, trades, manufactures, and mechanical employment, public traffic, and serving process. Well, those were forbidden. They were called Sabbath-breaking laws, and there were penalties there for fines, and including up to 24 hours in jail. We got a liberal streak in 1943 when we said that baseball, when conducted in a quiet and orderly manner so as not to interfere with the peace, repose, and comfort of the community, was allowed to be played between the hours of 1 p.m. and 6 p.m. on Sunday if played more than 500 feet away from any church. So we have, as a state, we've had this issue around us for a long time. When we had the hearing, we had 8 people who came in and testified in favor. Of those 8, there were 4 that were associated with Chamber of Commerces around the state. We had a young business person from Fargo who operates a company that designs and builds apps for digital devices. There was a mayor of Rolla who came in and talked about his wife was a nurse, and that they felt that they would support this bill. They considered themselves a very religious family, but his wife has duties as a nurse on Sundays, every other Sunday, and they were able to accommodate that and continue to have an active church and religious life, so they were testifying in favor. But this young business person from Fargo probably gave some of the best testimony that we heard, I think. He just stated that in the committee, that in his written testimony, that he believed it should be the right of all private business owners like himself to choose when they wish to operate. He said that North Dakota doesn't dictate to farmers when to farm, or hospitals when to practice medicine, or restaurants when to feed people, and he did not believe the state should dictate to other business owners when they can sell their goods. And he said if he could buy breakfast on Sunday morning, he should be able to purchase plumbing supplies in an emergency without having to drive over to Minnesota. And he pointed out those exceptions that I mentioned, 39 exceptions. And he told us, and I think he's right, that now North Dakota is now the only state in the country that has laws that ban retail sales during certain hours. He told us that Maine was the last state to abolish this type of restriction on retail business, and they did so in 1990. It did come up in committee the question of an employee's position. If an employee feels that this is undue pressure on them, and it was pointed out to us that there is a section of our law, 3406-05.1, that says an employer may not require an employee to work 7 consecutive days in a business that sells merchandise at retail. An employer shall accommodate the religious beliefs and practices of an employee unless the employer can demonstrate that it would constitute an undue hardship to the conduct of the employer's business. And that there's further qualifications in here to put that employer, the hardship on the business to test. So there does appear in our law to be protection for employees who, under our current law, would have the right to do what they need to make their religious observance. We had one individual testify in opposition to the bill, and this is a major organized church in North Dakota, and he told us that this really is not about religion. Their opposition is not based on religion. He has told us in the committee that the law provides a common period of rest and relaxation for the benefit of families and communities. Humans and communities need periods of rest and free time that allow them to tend to family, cultural, social, and religious life. And only when communities can set aside time devoted to these functions can human persons prosper and develop. And he told us that he thought it's a practice that had served North Dakota well. It is part of our North Dakota way of life that puts families and communities first. And we asked him in the committee, how important is that this time off be common? Could we, because we do provide some limits on work schedules right now, that certain occupations can't be on the job for more than so many hours at a time. And he felt that it was important that the time off be common, that there's something about the life of a community that is improved when this time off is held in common. So after we had the testimony in the committee, we had some committee discussion, and a lot of our discussion in the committee was around this principle of how far and can and should a government go in imposing its will and its judgment on when businesses can be open. And we recognize that in our state we've had a long tradition of Sunday opening laws, and there is a sense that our culture is changing, and that there is a desire on the part of businesses, business communities, and consumers to want to have the opportunity to be able to do what other states can do, to be able to shop at a time when they have the time. So when we got the bill, and as you can see, the bill is short, one sentence, it just repeals. We adopted the amendment in the committee by a 5-1 vote, and then there was a do not pass motion, which tied 3-3, and we were considering a without committee recommendation, but we thought we really needed to do something better than that, so we had more discussion and ended up passing the bill out of committee 4-2. So if there were maybe buttons in the committee, we probably could have got a unanimous vote, but because there wasn't strong feelings, although maybe I shouldn't say there wasn't strong feelings. We may have had 1 or 2 on the committee that had strong feelings, but there was a lot of questions about, is this something that we want to do or don't want to do, as you can tell that by the vote. So I think that most of the members of the Senate have been around long enough and had a chance to make their own judgments about this, and be very difficult to have their vote swayed one way or the other. I present to you the bill that came out of our committee with a 4-2 vote, and I encourage the Senate to follow their conscience.
Senator Erbley.
Well, Mr. President, I would be in opposition to this bill. And just for a minute, I'd like to just go a short way down the religious road, just to say that, you know, Jesus in his time took on the religious leaders of the day in disputes about what could be done on the Sabbath. And he came and he made the statement that says, man was not made for the Sabbath, rather the Sabbath was made for man. So that really tells me that there's nothing that we need to do on that day that's required, that we have to honor that day. But that day is to honor us, just as when God created the world and when he was done, he said, it's good, and he rested. And so this gives us an opportunity after a week's work that we can reflect back and say, this is good. I would make the comment that going to church is recreation, just like going to the lake or golfing. And it's really a matter of how you pronounce the word. If you say recreation or you say recreation, it amounts to the same thing. And so we need that day to rejuvenate our mind, our spirit, and our body. It's a recreation. I look at this bill as being nothing more than just selfish consumerism, because we're really not going to buy any more than we normally would on that day. So there's really not a profit to be gained by businesses doing this. What this bill comes down to is workers that really don't have a choice. In my district, it's a large district, and most of it's rural. And the smaller business owners will tell me, well, it doesn't pay for me to be open because I wouldn't have enough business to even pay for the light bill. But I do have a good portion of my district that butts up against this city. And so I have a number of subdivisions east and south of this city that are part of my district. And they have told me, one person in particular who's a manager of one of the stores in the mall, that says that a manager, I don't have a choice whether to be open or not because it's corporately owned. So some company out of state is going to tell me whether or not I have to work. And my employees, the floor clerks and everything else will have to as well. Been sitting there in the human service budget listening to various needs out there, and daycare keeps coming up. And for these workers to find daycare on Sunday is going to be hard because most of them aren't open, and if they are, they're going to be charging more. So I see it as a real burden to the workers. And so I would hope that we could defeat this bill and let these people have some family time to recreate and enjoy the day. And I view this as a very strong pro-family bill, and I hope that I'd have others that join me in a no vote.
Senator Dever.
Mr. President, half the country was disappointed in the last presidential election. If the other candidate would have won, the other half would have been disappointed. It should not make as much difference as it does who the President of the United States is. America's strength is in her people. America is strong to the extent that her people exercise personal responsibility. Everybody talks about rights, but nobody talks about responsibilities. And we measure our rights, our freedom in terms of our rights, but we secure those rights through our responsibilities. It is said that there are three institutions created by God: the family, the church, and the government. It follows then that if all three are healthy and in balance, that society is healthy. But if you wanted to take over the government, or if you wanted to foist your philosophy on society, then what you would do is break the family down and neutralize the church. In order to understand the very intentional effort to do just that, it's useful to understand the difference between agnosticism and atheism. Agnostic literally means without knowledge. An agnostic neither believes nor disbelieves because they don't know. They can't see God. Atheism, on the other hand, means without God. Atheism is a belief system. Atheists believe there is no God. So if it's a belief system, what is their religion? It's called humanism, also known as secular humanism, also known as religious humanism. If you were to Google humanism, you might come to their website where they talk about separation of church and state and their efforts to bring that about. You would also find what you could call their Bible, Humanist Manifestos 1, 2, and 3, written in 1933, 1973, and 2003. And you would see that that's not only a religion, but it is a specific agenda. Mr. President, if I may, I'd like to read a quote from the Humanist magazine.
You may.
Okay. Mr. President, this is written by John J. Duffy in an article entitled "A New Religion for the New Age," Humanist magazine in 1983. The battle for humankind's future must be waged and won in the public school classroom by teachers who correctly perceive their role as the proselytizers of a new faith, a religion of humanity, utilizing a classroom instead of a pulpit to carry humanist values into wherever they teach. The classroom must and will become an arena of conflict between the old and the new, the rotting corpse of Christianity, together with its adjacent evils and misery, and the new faith of humanism. Mr. President, we don't teach evolution in school because it's settled science. We teach evolution in school because it's not creation. Now, why is that important? Well, it's about control. Consider the words of the Declaration of Independence, which say, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." If there's no Creator, where did those rights come from? If they come from man, or if they come from government, they can be taken away. So freedom is not what they're pursuing. The doctrine of separation of church and state is first and foremost an acknowledgement that each plays a primary role in society. So are we a Christian nation? No. It's not the function of government to be Christian. It's the function of government to protect religious freedom, to allow every religion to exercise their faith, including the humanists. But when an atheist goes to court to take God out of the pledge, to take God out of the classroom, to take God out of the Boy Scouts, they are using the government as a tool to advance their faith in violation of the First Amendment Establishment Clause. Are we a nation of Christians? Yes. In terms of numbers, in terms of our heritage, we are a nation of Christians. So I often have conversations with people that express concern about the direction that our country in. Sometimes they will ask me, what can I do? Well, there's three things. First, recommit yourself to your family, including your extended family. Second, involve yourself in your church. Be there, but be involved. Third, engage in civic involvement. And here's the Dick Dever 5-step process to civic involvement. Step 1 is educate yourself. That is, take an interest in what's going on around you. Step 2 is decide for yourself what's right and what's wrong. Step 3, decide for yourself what's important. Step 4, recognize that you can't change everything. And step 5, resolve to stand for what's right and to fight for what's important. I know that chambers of commerce across the state support this bill. It's interesting, a few months ago I was at a meeting at my chamber. The topic of discussion was behavioral health. And I commented that I have been a member of this chamber for 27 years, not because of any personal benefit to me or to my business, but because it is the mission of the chamber to enhance the quality of life in our society. The value of Sunday morning is not in the profits that roll through the cash registers. The value of Sunday mornings is in the time away from the hurry and scurry and the hustle and the bustle, the time to spend with family, the time to reflect on the many blessings that we have been bestowed on us as a country, and yes, to be grateful to the one who did that. I'm voting no on this bill.
Senator D. Larson.
Mr. President, I was one of the 2 no votes on our committee, and I do want to thank the bill carrier for doing an excellent job of presenting what was stated in our committee. There are a couple of reasons that I'm opposing this bill. One is that even in the past few years, our social media has been on fire with people saying, stay home on Black Friday. Let the employees stay home and be with their families. If you shop, they will have to work. And so there has been even a social movement towards letting people stay home and be with their families. One of my constituents contacted me and said, please, please, do not let this bill pass. If you do, my competitors will be open. I will have to be open. I won't earn one more dime of income, but my overhead will go up. And so, Mr. President, I feel that this is important for us to allow that time with families and not to pressure business into having to be open just to stay competitive. Thank you.
Senator Clemens.
Mr. President, I'm opposed to House Bill 1163. As a member of the Human Services Committee, and along with my fellow members of that committee, we sit day after day listening to the heartbreaking stories of people that are losing children, losing spouses, losing parents due to the drug epidemics, the alcohol abuse, spousal abuse, children abuse. We hear it day after day. And what we've been told over the years is keep God out of our school, keep God out of our community, let us do what we want. Now we're looking at a bill that is going to also remove a couple extra hours in the morning that could allow people to go to worship. If they don't go to worship, at least they can spend time with that child at home. Maybe that child that's on the verge of becoming another statistic in North Dakota from drug abuse or whatever the abuse may be. I just feel We pass bills by the hundreds that are taking freedom away from somebody in one form or another. But then we get criticized for passing a bill or not passing a bill if it favors the Christian community. So with respect to all those things, I just request, do not pass House Bill 1163, vote red.
Is there any further discussion? Senator Grabinger.
Mr. President, I happen to be a retail businessman in this state. And sometimes the only time I can see a customer that's got to come from a long distance to see me and purchase something is on a Sunday. That just happens to be the way it is. Not everybody has days during the week that they can get off and go shopping and do things. Not everybody celebrates Sunday as their day of rest. There are other religions that recognize a different day. You see, Mr. President, I think the relevance of this law, the time for this law, has passed. One of the things we in retail are subjected to today, and we've had talks about the taxes on it and so forth, is online competition. Retail businesses across this state are suffering because of online businesses. On Sunday, you can go buy anything online. You can go on and get many of the things that the carrier of this bill talked about. But you can't go down to your local store and get it. So that's what I'm talking about. I think us retailers need the opportunity. If we think we want to be open and it's good for our business to be open, we should have that opportunity. Not everybody has Sunday off. Some people work weekends and get paid extra for doing it. That's their choice in many cases. I think I will certainly support this bill, and I hope others will too.
Senator Roars.
Mr. President, I've struggled really hard with this bill because I'm a businessman and I believe in the free enterprise system. I'm also a father of 5, a grandfather of 13 with 2 more to come shortly. And I value the family proposition much higher than I do any business proposition. After doing research, and I received this letter, this fax that I shared with some of you today from a very good friend of mine who operates in the entire United States, retail business, a very large retail business. He operates 4 of those businesses here in North Dakota. He offers many of them in Minnesota. His analogy was convincing to me that we really do not need to be open those extra couple hours on Sunday morning. He values family over business also. We, here in America, we create special days for many special things. Veterans Day, Martin Luther King Day. Here we're talking about a half of a day per week for family. The most important thing that we do on this earth is raise our family. I believe this bill should be defeated, and I hope that others will agree with me.
Senator Unruh.
Mr. President, the people of this body have heard me talk this session a lot about leveling the playing field, allowing the free market system to work on its own, the government picking winners and losers. And I believe that there have been a lot of good points made here on the floor today, but a lot of them haven't revolved around the actual policy that we're looking at here in this bill. This bill encompasses a lot of those philosophical points that I made, and if you take a look at one of the repeal sections that the carrier mentioned, 12.1-30-30, there are currently 39 exceptions to the Sunday sales prohibition, including Christmas tree stands, libraries, zoos, bait shops, gas stations. The list of exceptions to this rule are many. We should either expand that list or eliminate it. The rules should be fair for all business owners, not just those business owners that are currently on that list. I'd like to give an example, if I could, Mr. President. There is an establishment in Northwest Bismarck that has 2 parts to its business plan. One is a store that sells goods. The other is a restaurant that sells food. They half of their business is allowed to sell food on Sunday mornings to patrons coming in and out of their business. The other half of their business isn't allowed to operate, their store part of their business. They've got their staff there, present, providing services to folks who want them. If somebody wants to buy a stick of gum after they've had their pancakes, after they've gone to church on Sunday morning, they can't buy a stick of gum from the store because the North Dakota Century Code doesn't allow for them to be open. So those patrons who want a stick of gum after they've had their pancakes, after they've gone to church that morning, have to drive across the street to the gas station to buy a stick of gum, where they can buy a lot of other goods, items, services, gas for their cars, because that business is on the list of places that are allowed to sell those items. Another point I would like to make, Mr. President, is that this repeal doesn't force businesses to be open. It simply gives them the choice to do so. It gives stores, like the one I previously mentioned, the ability to provide their goods to patrons with their staff. Mr. President, this isn't about sales tax revenues generated and the ability to shop during this time on a Sunday morning, online sales, or even the government trying to urge people to rest. I put family before business myself. My daughters and I attended church this past Saturday evening instead of on Sunday morning. We went to the grocery store together on Sunday morning to get a bunch of different items because we had a long list of baking and cooking that we wanted to do on a snow day. My daughter had a little bit of a fever, and she wanted to get a thermometer because they broke the one that we had a couple of weeks ago. So we had to buy a new one. She was convinced she had a fever. I know she didn't, but we went to the grocery store, got the rest of our items, looked for a thermometer, and they didn't have one there. And she looks at me and she goes, "Okay, well maybe we can go to the drugstore to find one." And I said, "No, actually, we can't. The drugstore's closed on Sundays," and I explained to her why. And she looked at me and she said, "Okay, that doesn't really make sense, Mom. Can you explain that to me?" So I did my best to explain the policies that North Dakota has on their books, and we survived the rest of the day without a thermometer. It wasn't a make or break situation for us, but this bill isn't about religious freedom. We can all practice those in the way that are most appropriate for us and for our families. But this is about freedom that allows all businesses to make the decision whether or not to offer their services on a Sunday morning, not just a select few.
Is there any further discussion? Senator Jay Lee.
Mr. President, I think it's important to note that this bill only relates to retail sales, really. I've never had a job that I didn't have to work weekends. I worked in a hospital a fair amount of that time. I think that any of you who have either been in a hospital or had a family member or a friend in a hospital expect people to work on Sunday morning. If you've ever gone out to brunch after church, you expect the cook and the waitstaff to be working. Same with Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, Thanksgiving, all those other holidays that you don't want to cook at home that you decide to go out, and there are a fair number of people in my community who do that. I'm sure lightning would strike me dead if we didn't cook at home for some of those holidays, but a lot of people like to go out. I think it's really important to note that a lot of farmers work on Sunday if it turns out that it's a day that needs to be done. If it's dry enough to harvest when it's been raining, if you finally are able to get into the field after you have had days away from it. There are some farmers who won't, but there are a lot of farmers who do. And I grew up on a farm where, when it was important, they worked on Sunday. So I think it's a really important thing to think about the fact that we're looking at a really narrow niche of people here. Back 1,000 years ago, when the North Dakota had no Sunday opening and Moorhead, Minnesota did, there were a lot of those sinners from North Dakota who had their cars parked in the Moorhead Center Mall parking lot because they were shopping in Moorhead. And so obviously there were people who wished to do that. A couple weeks ago, when I was on my way home from church, I needed contact lens solution. It was 11:15. It's very similar to the previous speaker's comments. The grocery stores sell a whole bunch of that stuff now because of the blurring of the differences between retail establishments, as has already been mentioned. But the kind I like is not stocked by the grocery store. and I was going to have to go back and at 45 minutes later to a drugstore that might be open so I could buy contact lens solution before heading back to Bismarck. It's those little inconveniences here and there. The other thing about when Minnesota opened up and North Dakota had not, and there was a lot of discussion about what the impact was on staff. The people in the Moorhead Center Mall who were employers as well as employees said that many of the people working there volunteered to work on Sunday because they could have extra hours. A lot of them were students. Obviously, we live in a college town. But a lot of them were students, and some were parents, in which the other parent would be home to provide childcare while one of them worked at the mall and they didn't have to pay for that extra childcare. So, you know, I think we need to allow the families to make their own choices. I don't think that I am any less spiritual because I would like to have bought contact lens solution 2 weeks ago on Sunday. A store that is freestanding is always going to have the ability to decide when to be open. The Franklin Covey stores have never been open on Sunday. Hobby Lobby has never been open on Sunday. And if I ran a store, I would have to decide if I was going to be open on Sunday, either at noon or if this bill is passed at 10. So I think it's really important to recognize there are a lot of working people who do not work retail and who are working at some point shifts that are all a part of a 24/7 work schedule. And we take them for granted in many ways. So I think we need to keep in mind the fact that it isn't only retail that we should be regulating here. That's micromanaging in my view, and I plan to support the bill.
Senator Davison.
Mr. President, I'll be brief. I think most everything has been said. I needed to point it out that in the larger cities, such as the one I represent in eastern North Dakota, we have multiple times that we go to church. We go to church at 6:30. There's a dinner beforehand. We have about 5,000 to 6,000 people in our congregation. You know, I'm going to guess 2,500 to 3,000 of those people attend church in different services throughout the week. The largest service happens to be on Wednesday nights, where people come together for dinner. They go to church with their families. Their kids go to school, go to Sunday school afterwards on Wednesday nights, and they choose to do other things as a family for their Sunday mornings. And so it feels a little bit like a rural-urban kind of issue here today, a little bit too. And so I just want to point out that there are many opportunities to make those choices as we contemplate this vote. With all due respect for the senator in District 46 and the email that we have on our desk, I think it's fair to point out that if you go to your website, that store that we're talking about, in Nebraska they open at 11 a.m. in the morning, and in Wisconsin they open at 10 a.m. in the morning. And my guess is that's because of competition. It happens to be that store has very little competition in Fargo, and it has a small store across the river that can open, my guess is at 10 a.m. And so I think we need to keep in mind that their stores worldwide or United States wide open plenty of time ahead of the noon. So I needed to point that out. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Any further discussion? Hearing none, questions on the final passage of House Bill 1163 as amended. Secretary will open the key. Each senator will record his or her vote. Have all the senators voted? Does any senator wish to change their vote? Secretary will close the key, take the tally. Final tally on House Bill 1163 reveals 22 ayes, 25 nays, 0 absent not voting. The bill is lost. Next bill under consideration is House Bill 1251.